Okay, so I will record for this the slideshow, and there's also a recording that of this session that I gave to the part-time students as well, if you want that one. So what we're going to cover is introduction to the dissertation, talk about your supervisors and how we set supervisors up and how you work with them. And I've got ethical approval process, but I think we'll just skim over that bit because we've done quite a lot on that. So what I do want to do is I will show you Moodle page now. So I'm going to stop sharing and then share the Moodle page separately. This shows how I am just not used to working on this machine. Thank you for your patience, everybody. Okay, so the Moodle page. So this is just like all of the other Moodle pages. There's perhaps a bit more on it, and we will show more later. So you have the overview, the announcements, all the standard stuff, the module guide for the dissertation, which has all of the guidelines that you need, the reading list, the Tell Us Aspire reading list, the module descriptor, how to use AI tools, and then you can see that it is the part-time students have already submitted a proposal. And you can see that I've got hidden, but I will share it later, is for full-time students to submit. And then the other submission documents. Booking appointments, there's a link there for you to book appointments. All the details of the workshop. So the part-time students are first, and then underneath that the full-time, and all of the resources will be linked to that. Okay, later on we will consider putting a template there for people to use if they want to, for when they actually do their dissertation. But now is thinking time rather than the writing time. So I'm going to stop sharing and then go back to
those times
mm-hmm.
for the workshop, is that separate from the 10 hours that we have, or is that?
I will explain that in a second. Okay, so Moodle is kind of what you would expect. The key things in there is you've got the module guide that gives you all of the guidelines in there. You've also, so that is a link, so that allows us to make updates. So it's always worth checking what's on there. The deadlines that you have are, the proposal I'm suggesting comes in on the 7th of February. So your proposal for your dissertation is different to your assignment for the research methods, okay? It may be in a similar area, but it will be different, okay? And the reason why I'm asking you to, it'll be, your proposal will be something that you will work on with your, something that you will work on with your supervisor. Okay, so your proposal 7th of February, hopefully you might not get your, I'm not quite sure whether you'll get your feedback in time for that, but you will have had time to think. Okay, so when we get to September, so that is September 2025. Sounds like a really long way away. I know that there's a whole load of students who've just got their marks back from their dissertations that they submitted in September. So when you work with your supervisor, they can give you feedback on your draft, okay? But only once. So my guess is you have conversations with your supervisor about the way forward, and then towards the end, you share your draft with them, and it could be by chapter. Now, sometimes they say, oh, well, you've got to get your literature review done and then your methodology done and things like that. I am of the view that actually things are a bit more messy than that. So you will negotiate with your supervisor, but the our recommended final date to share a draft with your supervisor is the 12th of September. And that is because that needs to give time to your supervisor to give some feedback and for you to action that feedback. But you can agree this with your supervisor. Okay, this is a flexible date. What isn't a flexible date is Friday, the 26th of September is your submission deadline for your dissertation. And I know it does feel like forever before we get there. So we will assign your supervisor around the focus of your study and your proposed research methods, because you will have noticed from the research module, not everybody's an expert in all areas and that people have particular expertise. So it's really helpful for us to know the type of research that you're planning to do and your focus of study so that we can assign the most appropriate one to you, okay? And I want your proposed study details by the 10th of January. I will share a Google form with you to do that. This is not a commitment to that. This is just to give us an idea about how we can assign your supervisor. And we'll try and assign your supervisor as quickly as possible so that you can meet with them and discuss your proposal. And so we can only do this assignment once these forms have been submitted. I'm pausing just in case there's any questions.
Can I just ask,
yeah,
if you've had a sort of idea in your head, but having had the research methods module this term, wonder whether that will be workable or achievable, what do you suggest is plan of action then?
So if you put your focus of study and your proposed research methods, and there is an option to add anything, and you can say, well, actually, do you know what? I'm not sure this will work, so I'll need some advice. But what I do need to know so that we can assign the supervisors is an idea of which way you're going, because otherwise, might assign somebody.
Things I've heard, realising it's going to be harder to do than I thought it would be. So.
And my guess is with your interest area, you're likely to get Matt. Okay.
I was just going to say that this specialised sort of groups, do they sort of get then those?
Well, I know that Mark does not have any capacity to take on any dissertation students, full-time dissertation students, but there are other people on the team that might be able to, that will be able to. And even if Mark can't do the supervision, he can certainly support with the supervisor. Okay, and that's why we need to know. So we've got a balance of the supervisors that we've got available and what you want to do. Okay, but I would really welcome people to have a shift, because although all the proposals that I've seen have been good, you might think, do you know what, I'm not that interested, or I think if I do it this way, it might work a bit better. So, but even when you put that proposed study details in, you're not locked into it. It's just to give me an idea of who to put you with.
For the January 10th submission, will it just be like a
like a couple sentences before we want
Oh,
to?
absolutely. Yeah, it's a really informal thing. It's just so that I've got an idea of who to assign.
Is there anyone we can talk to before that?
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
But remember, this is, you're just giving a focus of the study
Yeah,
and
that's
the
what I'm
research
thinking
methods.
in
You're
terms of-
not tied into anything.
No, but having someone else perhaps know around the area.
Yeah. What
it
I
might
would
just
suggest
help
is,
to,
yeah,
and so like Claire was saying, you thought that maybe because you've done your research module in a certain area, you found out that it actually might not be as easy as
yeah,
because you've gone
It's
through
the
that.
children
whereas-
participants is
Yeah.
harder because I've
Yeah.
always, I've realised I've got to get out of my mindset of being a teacher to being a researcher.
Yeah.
I'm so used to being able to do what I want
Want
to do
to do.
with children in school,
Yeah.
and it's different
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
researcher.
It really is. What I would
So
say,
that's why-
Rosalind, is that leadership and management, your focus does need to be leadership and management. We have another tutor who delivers leadership and management. You're likely to be with that person. I suggest when you've put the form in,
Yeah.
I think you've probably got quite clear ideas. As I will repeat again, this is not a commitment. And then you meet with your supervisor and then you discuss around the process. And then you do your proposal, which I'll tell you about in a minute. Even that is not a commitment.
Yeah, no, I personally don't have an idea. That's
Yeah.
why I thought maybe it would be good to
Yeah.
talking to someone prior to that.
Yeah, but yeah, you must have it. Yeah, so you've got over Christmas to think about an area that would interest you. I do know that the person that might be a supervisor, or who will be a supervisor for some leadership and management students, particularly specialises in coaching and mentoring.
There, Eric's asking to be let in the meeting.
Oh, well, that is because Eric is not on his Brooks account. Oh, I can't see him there. Could you ask him to try on his Brooks account? Hi. Because normally I have a notification. Okay, so just to reiterate, you're submitting your dissertation in September, next September, I think it's the 26th, it's the last Friday of September. You can, the sort of the last date for sharing drafts with your supervisor is, she says, because I can't remember now, it's the 12th of September. That's to give time for them to, respond and you to respond to any of the feedback. What I would suggest is keeping communication all the way through. Don't just kind of put your head down and think, I'll just bang something out at the end and they can give me some feedback, because that won't give you chance to kind of get stuff done. I want a proposal from you by the 7th of February. And that is not a commitment that you're absolutely going to do that. That is really so useful for you to see, is the literature there, and is this feasible? And it, it's a working document for you and your supervisor. So we assign the supervisors. BJ.
Hi, on the previous slide, Claire, I just had a question about, I think it said 7th February 2026. Is that
No,
part?
it's supposed to be 2025.
Okay,
That's my error.
thank you. No problem. Thank you.
Okay. So we assign your supervisors around the focus of your study and your proposed research methods. Do not worry if you're not really quite sure. Just give us a ballpark figure so that we can actually try and assign the best supervisor for, or the most appropriate supervisor for you. And that's the 10th of January. So you'll have had time to think. You won't have had your feedback or from your research methods probably. but you've had feedback on your plan, so you have an idea of kind of which way forward to go. Okay, so once you're assigned your supervisor, I'll tell you as soon as we can, because again, I've got to work with staff availability as much as anything else. So for the dissertation, this is not taught in the same way as all of the other ones. The majority of the work is independent work. So there are 4 workshops that kind of cover the, the kind of the procedure of doing a dissertation, not your content. The content is your supervisor. They will be the experts in that. There are drop-in sessions that you can book. The link to those are on the Moodle page. And, as I say, you can email me. You will have what's called up to 10 hours with your supervisor. So that is not 10 hours of meeting. That is 10 hours of reading drafts and providing feedback. So that'll include emails and meetings. Depending on how it works for you and your supervisor, those could be face-to-face or online. So staff are allocated 10 hours per supervision. They are often quite generous with that time, but I think it is appropriate to recognise that you cannot use too much of their time, because they will say yes, and then it just sort of adds pressure. I know from doing this work, 10 hours doesn't even cover it as a type of meeting. So this is specifically about you working independently. You will be driving this relationship, and your supervisor is there, so to supervise and support. If you've got any concerns about how that process is going, do let me know, and we can see if we can find a way through. So you'll be introduced to your supervisor by email. The supervisor will be copied into that email, and it's for you to contact your supervisor to set up a meeting. Okay, and it will be your responsibility to maintain records of these meetings. There is a template there. I suggest you use it as a Google Doc that you share with your supervisor, because I don't know about you, but I think about things when I'm not in a meeting, after I've, I was going to say walk the dog. I don't have a dog, by the way. But it's often when you're doing other things that you have all of these ideas. You could add those to that document, and it means that you're starting to develop records of that thought process. The supervisor could see that before the meeting and perhaps provide some feedback for you within the meeting. But it's your responsibility to make notes of every meeting. So what expectations have come out of that meeting, for example. You're going to go and read, or it could be that your supervisor is going to share some references with you, and you're going to read those in preparation and use those elsewhere. So it is your responsibility to maintain those records. Now, most supervisors will also maintain their own records, but this is really helpful, having these records to remind yourself of that process. And you must be prepared for these meetings. Do not have a meeting with your supervisor and waste it. There needs to be a reason for your meeting. If you want to discuss your literature review, for example, know what you want to discuss. Perhaps share some stuff with your supervisor first. And you need to allow time for your supervisor to review it as well.
Meetings normally last, I know it said 10 hours.
Yeah.
But I suppose an hour long, or
it depends on how it works. If you're prepared and focused, I would say half an hour. But it really does depend. I'm still pausing if anybody else has got any questions about supervision.
If we email them before the meeting, well, or the night before, or the day before the actual appointment, it's trying for them to look over your work before they.
And I would say more than
included in the 10 hours.
Yeah, if they're looking at work, yeah. So what I would say is don't get tied up with the 10 hours. this is what goes on their workload plan. Yeah. And, you know, we've had students in the past that have overused their supervisor and then, you know, had limited supervision at the end when they really need it, because this is about, you know, your independent study. Yeah, and it's, you know, you'll develop a relationship with your supervisor. So the meeting notes, so it's a Google Doc, there's a template, you'll be asked, and it's on Moodle, asked to copy it as usual, and save it in your Google Drive. And as I say, it is your responsibility to keep this document. And it is really helpful. You think, oh, I'll remember that. But yeah, it's really helpful to keep those notes, because you might start in one area and then remember that you've already discussed something in your supervision that you actually reject. You think, oh, do you know what, that's not going to work. And then as you work forward, you think, do you know what, my supervisor was right. And if you've already got the information about it, you can just go back to it. As I say, yeah, we don't check up on these notes. This is just a recommendation. Oh, that was a stop. So you're going to send a form to me saying what your subject area is and your research tools. Research tools, yeah, it doesn't matter if you're not really quite sure, but it gives us an idea. So for example, if somebody wants to do a systematic literature review, I know that I'm not the person for you, okay? Because mainly I don't really agree with them. I think literature reviews are really good, but not systematic ones for dissertations. But that's my personal view. So that's what we take into account, is, you know, people's approaches. Susanna doesn't do MA dissertations, but yeah, imagine if she was, if somebody was going to do documentary evidence, historical type thing, Susanna would be the person that we would choose. But we have a broad range of people. John Reed is a supervisor, is one of the supervisors, so he will pick up some of the SEND stuff. Rachel Faulkner, some of you have Rachel Faulkner as a academic advisor. She's also does SEND. Mark doesn't have capacity, but we have a tutor called Joe Thompson, who does leadership and management. But other of us, also have management experience too. Carmel is likely to pick up the childhood and youth studies type ones. Anything to do with literature is likely to be Matt Tobin. So that's how we work it. I'm going to stop and let you have a discussion between yourselves about anything, and then ask me, because quite often it's when you've had the courage to realise that other people have the same queries. Hi, everybody. Can you pop your hands up if you've got any questions about what I've covered so far?
Know that this is something that was going on in our dissertation. So on the January, then we just need to say that, okay, I don't know, and then or whatever, like just a broad idea. You don't have to give. You might have an idea. Methodology. That it's not even fixed. You can change it later if you don't like it. It's really hard to think about it. It's very positive thing. But it's going to be something small. Just have an idea of what you want to know. It's just if you just concert time. I think
I was like, oh, this looks a bit too lighty. Yeah, it's worth yeah.
So it may be worth.
So I was thinking about policy. I'm quite confused about how they created. I don't know if that's going to be useful. I don't know.
Well,
I did see you could talk to parents very much.
Well, have you found any parents about how they're probably should research?
Yeah. Like if you talk at the same time.
No. What I'm saying is, look to see what they've done research. So I want to do. I'm not saying do what they say.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it might be an idea of how
If that's one
I didn't just say faculty put it out there, put in a lot of money, but it's not out there.
I think coming from, you know, if you're in the school leadership side of it, thinking about, you've got to have policies about professional conduct, policies about behaviour, I don't know, you've got loads of policies for everything. It's about having, not, I know some people stop you in and
Yeah, but
I don't like the most intelligent one, that they would like, they would get the highest score. Told me about it. But it's very,
I don't
you used to, it was the same guy, you just don't want to mention his name again.
No, documentary.
Oh, yeah, okay. That's what I meant to say, yeah.
Yeah, that's what you're.
What do you think something that
We could go to Wednesday, do some shopping and then we can have like publicity or something and then.
So, as I say,
Okay.
see if that's the sort of stuff that appeals to you, whether that's something.
Yeah.
Look to see what research has been published, related to policy, see how they fit it.
Yeah.
It could be policy, it doesn't have to be school policy.
Yeah, it's something, it's just boring, I don't know what it is, it just feels like I want to know more.
And I remember.
Oh, you think that yours? Proposal is very welcome. As was yours. This welcome. Well, yeah, because I mean, what you do.
Oh,
Sorry.
Oh, it's really hard, right, it won't really, just to get your, you know, to
Doesn't
think
mean
of it
it
out.
doesn't mean you find it well.
I think international.
Yeah. Well done.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I know you got loads of really good feedback, but it was a really good.
Yeah, I was, do you know what, I think like I said, it's sort of pre-nerves.
Yeah,
I don't
it
feel
is.
confident at all in it, and it's
And
when
you
you
get
when you get at least the feedback back,
Yeah.
and you know exactly where you are, where you stand.
Right, about autism
Yeah.
and with this
Yeah.
and autism and girls.
When you're a hot water heater broke on New Year's Eve. and the
How should
18-year-old
I
freshly
choose my
graduated
title?
kid who came to visit,
Can
really
do
had-
the research because
So what, remind me again, because I remember it being good, but I can't remember the details now because I've slept.
You must have worked really hard over the weekend. Oh, I was like,
Because I
where
just
where-
wanted everybody
around
to
this
know,
bit,
yeah.
I didn't expect you to.
It depends on how you want to do, yeah, to do it, the focus that you want, so. Were you wanting, yeah, what do you want to find out?
Well, why, as you know, the girls diagnosed lately as autism.
Yeah,
And
and there's an increasing awareness of girls with autism in primary schools.
I guess I think the
Because
more
they're
relevant, but I
representation.
think like the
I
comparison.
think,
But I think that, like,
yeah,
that's
I mean, my
really not
granddaughter.
So
is
it
autistic
doesn't
situation,
necessarily
she
make
doesn't
sense to
speak in
people
school.
other than just kind of
Have
the-
she doesn't speak in school, but yeah, so it may be one to look at how those different presentations.
No, I'm
So,
aware of.
because you're on SEN,
But
aren't
then
you?
on the other
Yeah.
hand, like.
So it depends on which,
I really want
if
to
I was
work
you,
in,
kind of decide which age range you want to go to.
athletics.
Would you, because this is still a
And
proposal,
I just don't really know like
yeah, would
what
you want to
needs to be.
really going to get technical people for talking to vulnerable individuals. who deal with autism. But you can, yeah, I did say you can ask
Like the
for,
way that student athletes
yeah,
are treated in.
journals, yeah, because you know, ask students if they would mind sharing their journals with you, and then you might be able to get those. So it depends on what you're looking for,
And then they're.
but it may be you ask teacher perceptions, and to be honest, that's going to be rubbish. No, I don't mean it's rubbish, it's their perceptions, you know, what you could say at the end of it would be is,
I think
that's
especially
their
with the,
perceptions, yeah, what we know about autism is actually
like
hardly so
the
much.
name of the thing just
Yeah.
changed it, so
Yeah.
you don't have to.
Yeah, I
be-
mean, I assume that my
Like, you
daughter
can
was,
pay
so my daughter's in her,
Student athletes that are being paid.
and as a child,
Yeah,
I thought she
like
was
their
autistic,
time
and I
at
was told
school
maybe
relations,
she's still.
they are getting
Yeah,
like
that
a
was-
bonus
that was
for
it.
signing
He,
to college.
yes, yeah, so it's, yeah, there's a lot of
But
it
then
kind
I'm
of there.
actually part of the lawsuit.
Yeah.
Like,
But also, yeah, I'm sorry for
Yeah,
speaking
the
over you,
lawsuit that
but kind of looking
there's like a
outside of
settlement
how you might be able to
to
do it, so it may
sort of
be
like
that
back
you,
pay
it's
university
yeah,
students who
female adults.
like weren't
Yeah,
really
that's,
paid
yeah,
by
and there's
their
lots of networks
university.
around that.
And
And
this whole thing,
yeah, you can.
and essentially the
interview
argument
them, but you
is
can also, as
that
I say, you know, ask the journal,
there's
you
a
know,
disproportional payment.
social
of
voice,
revenue
images,
generated
and
on
stories, and things like that.
Like,
Because it,
you have to
if you think about autism, female, it's all about really struggling
who are
to
like the
communicate.
short for
Speaking, so
there's still
an alternative to an entry rate. Because you have to build a like relationship to be able to, yes.
And it doesn't sound so bored.
Yeah. So, yeah, if I get some, you know, some of those,
Yeah.
but we should really get
Yeah.
information. It should be that you ask, you've got your learning journey. And you discuss that learning journey.
So more like my
And
ideas
then
are maybe,
maybe
but I want to do
analyze
something
the
at university.
learning journey
Yeah.
image as well as the perception. So learning journey is you can ask them for the, you know, what their education is. And then you could, so you've got some representation, there's
the hardest thing
dates
for
in
me is
there
coming
about kind of key
question.
events.
And how did this
Yeah,
go
this is
into
transition from primary to secondary.
university?
Really difficult time.
Yeah.
For the dissertation.
Yeah.
The change.
I do
And
that, I want to do something.
It's like there's
So you literally
everything
everything
you
before
do
it.
is
But I have to ensure that
Ideas
someone
down.
related
And
to
then
exactly
we
that.
Okay, so there's lots of examples to do that, you know, you look at the, I think there's a section on.
And I would want to put more implementation oriented.
Approaches
not how that
to
would be.
research,
I
but
want to see.
yeah, you
If, for example, it's
got
not
you've got individual
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah, it makes a difference. Yeah.
Speak. You come
And like my college
would be
method,
straight
which
to.
was related to the professor, is very much similar. I'm working on.
So, yeah, so there's
I'm
lots of
just
different
now
ways that you can do it.
intervention in I'm working about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Just fancy project is.
So it would be very, as you can see, I've been particularly interested because, you know, yeah, yeah. And do you know what? I think something that we should embrace and get rid of alternative. Rather than thinking.
Maybe
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
But once I do make that difference
I just want to check to see how everybody's going.
We're discussing that was this, research methods submitted, and we need to put in for interview question form in the appendix.
Yeah.
But the appendix doesn't count in the word.
No, it doesn't count.
Yeah.
I
But the
finished my
questions
research
are an ethical considerations, how you.
formative, so I was like working on that
Yeah.
on Friday.
Yeah,
and, I appreciate
Yeah.
comments. I think that helped me kind of.
About that.
Just
Yeah. Do you know, I am so excited that I haven't talked about it because technology is my thing. I've got my master's in technology, creativity and thinking.
Oh, very
It's
interesting.
like, I haven't done it for years. I'm so excited to do much more of it. So,
Yeah.
any other sort of questions? I was really impressed with your
No, it was
proposal.
a shame.
Really impressed. I was impressed with everything.
I know it's one of those good things, John.
But yeah, it
Because
was-
they actually said it.
yeah, it was- yeah.
I took a lot of time.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think, yeah, that was.
And
And I'm really not sure whether
if
if I in the right direction.
Yeah, I think that you are in the right direction. I think kind of how you capture the information, you know, it's just because of,
So that like when we
kind of sensitivity. So I hope you don't mind me saying that then to look at Chinese, yeah, you
We
know,
know, we know.
you know, but I would love to see
Oh, really?
your, yeah, you can actually do those interviews in Chinese.
Yeah.
Because you're Chinese.
Like the self.
So it wouldn't be a problem. We would have to have the transcriptions in English. Yeah, you know, anything that you gave to us would need to be in English. But your participant information sheet can be Chinese too.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
No, this is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, absolutely for you. Okay, can I just stop people for a moment, just to say, I can't remember whether I've got it in these slides, but when you write up your dissertation, you will do an abstract. And if English is not your first language, you can do the abstract in whichever language that you choose. We'll need an English one, but we can have one, one in your own language as well. Yeah, costs us nothing. But it might be helpful if you want to be sharing, your dissertation later on. I haven't had a chance to get to the back table. Just want to check, was there any questions? So again, some really, really lovely and interesting projects. It's almost sad that you can't do them.
Parents' experience of literature in their childhood influences their own.
Oh, that would be a brilliant one to do.
Yeah. I would have quite liked some input from the child as well.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
trouble is when you're
If not,
doing an
Could be fascinating.
Yeah.
It's,
the problem when you're doing an MA dissertation is it is an MA dissertation, and it's not that you can't ask the children, but you need to be careful how you do it. And I just know that there's red flags as soon as there's children involved as participants. There are red flags.
If I'm sort of trying to look at the impact that their parents' reading experiences had on their own, it's almost like I'm going to be questioning the child about the parent as well, which doesn't sound right either.
No.
So I think it's, if I go along that line, that we have very much how the parent thinks they can.
Yeah, but also it may be worth looking at sort of the child's, if you can get data around a child's kind of progress with reading.
Really interests me is that really they ended up like that.
Yeah, well, also sometimes those able readers won't read.
Yes.
I remember asking my son's school to check whether he could read or not, because I mean I assumed he could read, but he just was not interested. And so he was year 6, so he was 10, 11, had a reading age of 13. We just and they didn't know what his reading. That was what concerned me, is they didn't know what his reading age was as well. But but it is a good way to go for it. Just want to check whether anybody has got any questions that are on the Zoom. Okay, so let's talk about the proposal. So you're going to send a form in to me early January saying, this is the kind of area I'm interested, this is what I think I might be wanting to do, and there's an option to have some, any kind of other any other information that'd be helpful. Okay, you will then be put in contact with your supervisor, and you will have a discussion with your supervisor about your proposal. Now, the structure of the proposal is in the module guide. We'll probably go over it in a minute as well. That's 2,000 words. It is formative. It is via Turnitin, and it's not anonymous. That's so that we can access it all together. Okay. And this will give you the initial overview of your research study that you will work with your supervisor to make into your dissertation. So this is a starting point. My top tip for this is actually do the reading, because that will really save you from going down the wrong path. Make sure that you've got sufficient information for you to draw on, particularly if I'm just thinking about what everybody in the room, I think I think there's a reasonable amount of literature out there for you to base the study on. Do not try to do a type of research that will be challenging on an ethical level, partly because you need to remember this dissertation is where you are showing us that you can engage in depth in an intellectual way with an issue. Okay, you are not saving the world. Sadly, I felt that I should have saved the world with my dissertation, but you're not saving the world. You are demonstrating those academic skills. So do something that's interesting because you're doing it for a long time, but don't make it difficult for yourself to succeed.
Would you say there's something to avoid? Is there some areas, would you say, pinpoint?
I would be reluctant to do that. The only thing that I think that you need to consider really carefully is if your participants are children. Try and find another way. Just because I know that that brings up red flags. Now, it doesn't mean, so for example, practicing teachers, they absolutely know how to do it. University ethics approval processes often don't recognise that because they're used to dealing with people that are not experienced in the field. So I would just say, save yourself a whole load of time. But what it also does is help you really think laterally about how you can gather information. We always assume that a voice, student voice, children's voice is about them telling you stuff. Then you have a conversation with a child. They will quite often tell you what they think you want to know, and then they might tell you stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with it. So if you really want to know what they think, there are other observations, using drawings, there's loads of different ways of doing it. So it's a real opportunity to think of some creative research methods. Okay, so in your proposal, 2,000 words, okay? Type of dissertation. So this is your proposal for the dissertation. I know it looks really similar to what you're already doing. So you're having a practice run with this the assignment for research methods. So the type of dissertation, so is it going to be empirical? This is all in the module guide. Is it empirical or is it literature based? Okay, and literature based can be documentary. So it could be, as Rosalind is interested in policy, that might be what you do. It doesn't have to be a literature review per se. Okay, your preliminary title. So I was going to say whatever. Whatever it is. Again, you're not going to be held by this. The introduction is the bit where you kind of say almost why you're doing it, and why you're particularly well placed to do it as well. Then your research questions. I actually quite like only one because these are small studies. A review of the literature. And then the methodology. So this is kind of, effectively by that we're talking about your research design. What am I planning to do? And then this timeline. Now the timeline, in all honesty, I would be surprised if people actually keep to a timeline. But what it really is helpful for is to actually get your head into that time space and really think it through. And it's really helpful for you to recognize key milestones in there that actually, if I don't get this done by this stage, then I'm really going to struggle. So for example, if you're looking at doing anything in schools, you've got to really get any sort of practical, any research within the school needs to be completed, I would say, by the end of May, because the way schools work, by the time you get to June, you're not kind of going to get much out of people. So if you're thinking of working in school, you need to get your ethical approval through as quickly as possible, because that will be kind of, that would be the, you were doing a Prince too, what do you call it? The thing that sort of holds everything up. If you're doing documentary evidence, you don't have to worry about that process. By review of the literature, this is a, like in the proposal that you're submitting for the research methods, this isn't, sort of a start of a literature review. It's not a full literature review. This is the type of literature I'm going to look at. This is the body of literature that I might look at. So for example, I'm really interested in Twitter, although I'm not interested in Twitter anymore, but that's what my research area has been. Blue Sky seems to be the new one for teachers. So for me, a body of literature that I would look at is one on medium communication. So uses and gratifications is so you don't have to put everything there, but if you're looking at an area in particular, you need to indicate the body of literature that you're likely to include in your lit review. Then your methodology and the timing. I'm pausing again for questions.
This is all February 7th.
No, the February 7th this is the kind of area I'm interested in. These are the type of research tools I think I'll do, and these are my questions. You don't have to put questions in there, by the way. By questions, I mean queries.
Also be bullet pointed.
No, this is this is a
Oh, proper sort of
a proper. It would So 2,000 words. It's formative. This is your starting point. Okay, I do look at these, but I don't give you feedback on these. This will come from your supervisor. And it is your starting point for actually planning out your dissertation. Okay, so the ethical approval process, we've talked about this. So you will all complete an E1 form. Those are on the Moodle page. This is a form where you tick through to say whether you're using human participants or not. If you've got any yes answers on your E1 form, then you will need to submit an E2 form. So you will complete your E1 form, usually after you've spoken to your supervisor, email it to your supervisor and to me, because I need to track who's done what, because we have to audit any ethical approval processes. If you are using human participants, then you will have an E2 form, and that's much more complex. And the more detail you put in there, the better, and that really helps with your methodology chapter. So you will have a discussion with your supervisor about your E2 form. Things like your questionnaires, the actual questions you're going to put in your questionnaires, or your schedule for your observations or whatever. It's really helpful to add those because it really helps the supervisor make a decision. Okay, so the supervisor will look at the E2 form with a ethics buddy. So they won't do it on their own. They'll look at it with somebody else and may make recommendations, and you may be asked to amend your E2 form. So it may go backwards and forwards. And this is not because you've done it wrong. This is not because, you can't do the research. This is about really refining your approach, because remember, ethics is as much about ensuring your results are valid. Okay. I know a lot of people see ethics as a way, something that you tick off that I've got to get through. I think you should see it as a way of ensuring that you've got the best possible research going. Okay. It is not unusual for you to have to amend your E2 form a couple of times. Okay. But when it's been agreed, you will then, your supervisor will issue what's called an E3 form. I know there's loads of these. It's just basically a form saying, yep, you're okay, crack on. You cannot start your research until you've got your E3 if you're using human participants. If you're doing documentary analysis or a literature review, you can get on straight away, okay? But what I would say is, don't forget that even with documentary analysis and literature reviews, in your methodology, you will need to consider ethics. And it's not about I have completed all the forms correctly. It is about, typically we wouldn't consider, wouldn't require ethical approval, however, because I'm looking, at a sensitive area, I need to, there are ethical considerations in there. And when you do, even when you put through an E2 and everything else, yes, you do need to say, I've done the process, but it's more than that. It's why have you taken those approaches that you have, for some people, so there's a form of inquiry called appreciative inquiry. So it is about framing things as in the positive rather than the negative. So it's a business thing. It's sort of also linked with action research. So action research will often, what is the problem? How do I fix it? Appreciative inquiry is, we're in this situation, what's good about it? So you might take that sort of approach, and that would be an ethical approach to take. So your E1 and E2 forms are available on the website, and the links are on Moodle, okay? What I would suggest that you do is, once you get to the E2 form, if you're going to use an E2, do some preparation and have a long conversation with your supervisor before you start completing it. I only say this is because they'll give you some advice, and it might reduce the amount of times you might need to make amendments. Okay. When you submit your dissertation, it's your E3 we're particularly interested in. And one of the reasons why is, I know quite often you're asked to submit your E2 form and your gatekeepers and all of that sort of stuff. What we often find is students forget to remove the identities on those sorts of things. So gatekeepers might identify the school, for example. You cannot identify any schools or institutions that you're working with. Okay, so that's why we have the E3. If you want to add the other stuff in there, you're welcome to, but the E3 is the thing that says that you've got ethical approval to get on with it.
We get an E3 regardless of if we have an E2.
Well, no, you won't get an E. So if you're doing documentary analysis, you won't get an E3. Thank you. That is,
Just thinking that, what if because obviously we need to do this earlier on in the year, so probably January, February time. If would it be okay to, I don't know, to fill one out just in case, if the documentary side of it isn't coming out the way you want it to be, then you might want to change it around a little bit. And then at least you've got it all.
Well, I would consider your documentary stuff now. You will get an idea fairly early on that it's going to, whether it's going to work out or not. Right, I'm going to give us a break because we've been at it for an hour. So if we come back at 20 past. Okay, those of you that are joining us by Zoom, we're going to come back at 20 past. Okay, see how we're doing online. Right, so we've talked about the E2 form, and I know you've heard a lot about E2 because we had it last week as well. But just to remind you that on the E2 form, it'll ask for the background and rationale for your proposed research. So you will have done that in your proposal that you will have shared with your supervisor. It will ask you about gatekeepers' permissions. So gatekeepers' permissions is if you are going to work in a school or any institution or an organization, you need some kind of letter. So you write to them, say, I'm doing this, this is what it's all about. Please can I have your permission either to access some documentation or to to work with these individuals. Okay. You then need to say your methods of data collection. So I'm doing interviews, and then I would suggest that you, well, don't suggest, I say add your interview questions, perhaps your schedule, give an indication of whether you're going to be online or offline. And what I would say is, before anybody comes to me and says, what a rubbish form, this is really poorly formatted, I know we cannot change it. This is one of my bugbears. I would just like it to be formatted correctly. If nothing else, I would like it to be a Google form because it makes it easier for our end to mess around with. But that's so we recognize that it is just really poorly formatted, but it is a requirement. You also need to indicate the participants involved in the research. Okay? So if you're doing autoethnography, it'll be you. Okay, you'll still need an E2 form for that, but depending on what you're planning to do, it might be suggested that you put together a better schedule of how you're going to log your experiences. So the participants might be children. I don't want children. It might be parents of whatever, whoever your participants are. And then you need to say whether you're in a dependent relationship with them. Now, I'm hoping that you won't be in a dependent relationship with them, but just say, could be that I work in this organization, I have this role, but there is no line management, relationship or something like that. So what we're looking for is not having a dependent relationship, because that raises ethical issues. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that you need to be really careful about your recruitment process and the information that you give them, and about withdrawing. Okay. It will also ask you about the potential benefits of the proposed research. This is because this is also based on a more medical thing. So the potential benefits will be greater insight into whatever. Potential adverse effects, none, apart from perhaps their time. So you can see that these, those two sections are really quite medical based. It would be unusual that they would have, well, you wouldn't be able to do it if there was any adverse effects. How you plan to get informed consent. So informed consent, you will do participant information sheets. You can do them in the most appropriate language, and that I mean by another language, but it could be that the language that you use in English is appropriate for your participants. So it may be that if you were recruiting a whole load of academics in your area, you might use some very specialized language in there. If you were recruiting, for example, parents, you would use layman's language and explain everything. You can also have participant information as a video. So that would, that would get passed if people, might have trouble reading. So for example, if you were looking at the experiences of students with sight impairment, you might want to do a video. No, not a sight, that would be an audio, wouldn't it? Yeah, you know what I mean. So, and if you're going to do a questionnaire, Google Forms, you can upload a video to that as well. And your participant information, if you're using Google Form, you can put that information in that top bit on the Google Form. And then you have a question, a required question, where they need to say that they've read and understood and they consent. That is their informed consent. But there's lots of ways. So there is a standard template for participant information. The language that you use in it needs to be appropriate for your participants. You need to talk about how you're going to ensure confidentiality of data. I would also like people to recognise about how you maintain confidentiality in the write-up as well. So even though you might have pseudonyms, if you are, for example, researching a relatively small community that know each other, they might be able to identify themselves from, some of the quotes that you use. So you might need to think about that. Also ask you about debriefing or providing feedback to participants. So what you could say is, for example, if you used a specific network to recruit your participants, you might say that you would share, once it's been marked and everything, you will share the outcomes, or you might say you would just share the findings rather than the full dissertation. Data storage and security, what you're going to be doing is you're going to save everything on your student Google Drive, because that covers you for GDPR. Stopping for a moment. Oh, debriefing. Oh, that's just you're telling the result, you're telling your participant the outcome of the study. That's all it means. Sorry. But you can see from these questions, it does come from a more positivistic, medical kind of framework. So we talked about the Gantt chart. Some of you have provided Gantt charts in the proposal that you're doing, but just remember that Gantt charts, for me, I think that the most important thing is actually for you to really see the feasibility of your study. You will not be held necessarily to it, but it's helpful for you to make sure that you're on track. You don't want to leave everything to the last minute. And even though you feel that you've not left everything to the last minute, sometimes it gets like that. And so you need the Gantt chart, in this proposal that you're going to be sending in as well. Yes.
Just wondering, this Gantt chart, is this like something that should be accurate to? Okay.
Yeah, as I said,
we should be starting on it already then.
Yeah, no, this was one that I mocked up. It is, as I say, the most use it will have is around when you're doing your planning, when you're starting off, is actually setting yourself those milestones and checking the feasibility. If I want to look at SATs results, I need to kind of get out there straight away. Or if I want to observe the administration of some SATs things, I need to get out there quickly to get that data. So your dissertation. So what we've talked about up to now has been that proposal that you will be sharing with your supervisor. You'll submit it via Turnitin. It is formative, it isn't anonymous, and it isn't linked to the repository. So it won't be picked up in any subsequent work. It is your starting point, but it's kind of where you articulate your thinking. Okay. Your dissertation is a summative. It is 15,000 words maximum. There is no 10% plus or minus. 15,000 words. So you can do under that, but I would try and hit the 15,000 words. Okay, the words will be not the abstract, the body, including all the titles and everything. Once you put your references in, none of the word counts after that. So your appendices are not part of the word count. But what I would say is that when you write your dissertation up, the reader should be able to get all the sense that they need from actually what you write, not necessarily from the appendices. So if you're doing an empirical study, by that's kind of some research. You do an abstract between 100 and 300 words. Take a look at abstracts in journal articles. It is a quick overview. You don't need any references in there. Okay, this is what I'm interested in. This is why it's important. This is how I did it. And this is what I found out. That's all you need to do. Your introduction, so you'll notice here I've kind of put sort of word counts in there only to give you an indication of kind of, you know, the proportions as much as anything else. But depending on your actual dissertation, it might be a bit different. So 1,500 words for the introduction. So that is, you know, I'm doing this because it's kind of really important. I'm really well placed to do it because I've got this sort of experience and stuff like that. You may not need 1,500 words for that, or you may need more. Your literature review, it's about 4,000 words. So again, you'll have a paragraph at the start saying this literature review will consider this this is really important. These are the bodies of literature that are really important. However, I am focusing on these because they are particularly important, because remember, you need to get some focus in there, because if you don't have focus, your writing will become descriptive in nature, because you say, oh, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this. So you provide a focus and a rationale for why you are having that focus. You can then do your literature review. It needs to be fluid and logical. You can have subheadings if you want, but just make sure it doesn't make your writing disjointed. Okay, your supervisor will give you advice on that. You're drawing on a body of literature. Predominantly, this should be peer-reviewed journal articles, but there will be some where you will have what's called grey literature, so it may be policy documents. Do not want websites and stuff like that. Don't think, no. The only time you might use those, you would need to make a case for it. So if, for example, you wanted to take a newspaper article, you would use it by saying, the current view is this, or this is an opinion. So any blogs or anything like that, those are opinions. And you would then need to make a case for why you would take it. So, for example, I've marked a dissertation where they referred to an app called TeacherTap. So TeacherTap it's been going, oh gosh, I think it's about 4 years. Has anybody in here had heard about TeacherTap? It's been set up by some well-known people within education, academically well-known. I don't mean, people that are known for being teachers. They're known for their academic rigor. So they've set this app up, and they send teachers questions every day at about 3 o'clock, and they answer questions. They've been doing this for years. So now they have got longitudinal data about a number of things. They've been so good with, they give prizes for how long you can keep, answer questions without a gap and stuff like that. They also do some qualitative work, and because of the people underpinning it, this data is now used by policymakers to inform policy. So this student said, use TeacherTap. And technically, we're saying, so she needed to have said why, the rationale, why it was important, and why the results from that was valid. So literature reviews are predominantly academic peer-reviewed literature. There may be times when you use something else, but you need to provide a rationale for it. It needs to make sense. And we'll have another session about writing your literature review. Then your methodology, about 3,000 words. This is what, this methodology chapter will, you cover your positionality, paradigm, etc., because that is really important. If you're doing qualitative work, the reader needs to understand the interpretive lens that you're likely to be using when you're analysing your data. Within methodology will be your ethical considerations, which might be, I've handed all the forms in, but it needs to be way more than that. And there is literature there to help you know. In methodology, the methodology textbooks are the gold standard. However, for masters, what I also like to see is so it may be that I'm going to do interpretive dance. I would then provide a citation that is relevant to my interpretation of interpretive dance as a research method. Okay. And then I might say something, I'm using, so other people have looked at this area and they too have used interpretive dance, or they've used something else. So you actually, when you're doing your reading, keep an eye on how people are doing their research so that you can actually pop those into your methodology chapter, because that is kind of quite a quick win of impressing the marker. Because not only so you will need to have a citation for all key terms, because we all interpret them in different ways. So this is a way of saying, this is how I'm interpreting it. So if you say that I am going to be, I'm an interpretivist, and you then cite Cohen and Mannion, I'm thinking, really, are you? Because they tend to be quite positivistic now. Although, so Cohen and Mannion is it Research Manual for Education or something like that? I would expect you to perhaps use the SAGE Handbook for Qualitative Research or US Flick's work or something like that. So those citations need to be relevant to it. And if you can, just make the effort to compare your decision making, your rationale, with what the literature also says. The next chapter is results or findings. So most qualitative is likely to be findings. What I would also suggest is, so you can see we've got quite a few words there, 4,000 words. You need to make clear in your introduction to that chapter how you're going to handle it. Now, for qualitative work, it's often better to do the findings and analysis together, because otherwise you're going to be repeating yourself. So you're saying, everybody found this really difficult, and then, you might say your proportions, and then you then go on to say, looking at the literature, I'm not at all surprised, or, this doesn't match what we're seeing in the literature. And then you might say, what else is going on in there? Okay, so just to make it, so whichever approach that you take, you need to make sure your write-up makes sense. So don't, if you're going to do a lot of talking about your findings, which if you're doing interpretivist work, you're likely to, don't have a findings and then an analysis chapter. And it may be that your discussions, you might do the discussions as part of your findings as well. So these are decisions that you can make later on, and then your conclusions. And when you're talking about conclusions, I'm always a little uncomfortable with the limitations of this study. I like to think of opportunities missed. Because quite often people say, oh, the limitations of this study is it's small. Well, you'll be choosing the most appropriate one, or it's not generalizable. And you know what I feel about that? It may be that, this will inform other studies. However, opportunities to look at this might be really helpful. Then your references and your appendices. In your appendices will be your E3 if you've done any participant stuff, and anything else that you feel will be helpful. Don't worry, I'll say all of this again a couple of times. So I'm in two minds about whether to give people a template or not, but I probably will, but you don't need to use it necessarily. If you're going for a literature-based one, so if you're going for a literature review, what I would say is you still need that chapter 2 literature review, because that's kind of, that's kind of making your case for looking at it. And then your methodology is about how you're going to do that literature review, if you're going to follow a systematic approach. Okay, so you still need a methodology, and then your findings are what you find out from that literature review. Okay, so it's because we always have a literature review in a dissertation, it's a bit confusing when you're doing a literature review because you're thinking, what is it? So what you need to remember is the chapter 2 literature review is all about you kind of saying, well, this is kind of what is already being published. And then the methodology is saying, yeah, I really want to look at what's published in this specific area, and this is how I'm going to do it. Okay. And remember, there's more than a systematic literature review. There's scoping, there's narrative, there's lots of ways of doing it. And also in your methodology, you will indicate how you're going to analyze it as well. You're going to take a narrative approach, or you're going to take a thematic approach.
Yeah, would you say this is a bit more difficult to do compared to an empirical?
Put my hand on my heart, I think it is.
Yeah.
Now, often what will happen, people will try, will suggest that people go for a literature one because it's just so much easier because you don't have to do ethics and stuff like that. But actually, I think it's much more difficult, and I think that your academic writing actually has to be really good. Yours is good, by the way, if you're wondering. So just remembering that, your methodology is how I'm going to look at this literature. So
it's scary actually to be able to fill out all those words in those sections.
Oh, you can do that easily. You won't have a problem. You won't have a problem. What will happen is that you'll start writing sort of, Jesus. And what I do is I keep a spreadsheet, obviously, and a tally of the words that I'm writing. So it counts it up, and then I get it. I do conditional formatting, so it goes a certain colour when I've got over my thing. And you're just writing, you think, oh God, I'll never get there. And then you think, oh God, I'm never going to get this down to 15,000 words. And that's where you need to be, because you need to go back and refine it. Whichever way you approach, there's challenges. But you're all here, so I don't have any.
I think this comes to my point of, can we get to speak to our advisors beforehand?
No, you get to speak to your advisor, and you might want to change it. And actually, this is a decision for you to make because it's yours, and whatever decision you make will be the right one.
It's a tough decision.
It's a tough decision, but do you know what? You're doing an MA. You're not, it's not.
I just feel like sometimes, because we're maybe not so experienced in it, but maybe we're blindsided a little bit.
No.
And maybe naive, and
So,
that's where I just want to step back and make sure I'm completely.
You cannot proof everything. I've tried to share as much information about where I see some of those things. Now, there's some great literature-based stuff that's done. Everything has a challenge.
The empirical way, I just find it more personal, and you're sort of more in control of it.
But to be honest, so don't mind me sharing, Rosalind, you're interested in policy. There's some really exciting stuff around policy. There's loads of and how you want, where, do you want policy in terms of what's in school, how it's enacted, what's there, or are you looking at policy at a local authority level or MATS level? Are you looking at policy in terms of government policy? Any document is solid evidence. Loads of ways of looking at it. Unfortunately, I do have somebody, they're not available. She does a really good job on policy. Particularly for further education. But go and have a look at those books. See if they're the way that if you're in doubt, look, go to the reading list and take a look at those research books around how to do some of the stuff, and just see, does that sit comfortably? For some people, doing a content analysis is the last thing that they want to do. But equally, for somebody, doing interviews is the last thing that you want to do as well. So it really suits you.
Tracy, our diversity and achievement tutor, was talking about when she was doing her studies and how she was really interested in forest school And when she started to read around, forest school was a relatively new thing and there wasn't enough.
Yeah,
What she
absolutely.
needed to do. So in the end, she still kept with that theme and she looked at more at the outdoors education movement.
Yeah.
And then she said she worked in one setting where they were establishing a forest school and took it from that angle rather than a forest school.
Absolutely.
Policy in
Yep.
general.
My heart
So
used to.
She came across hurdles, and it was.
Yeah, and
quite
that's
nice
that's the exciting thing to do. My heart used to sink every time I saw, particularly an undergraduate dissertation about forest schools, because I knew the literature wasn't there.
I think that's probably what I'm a bit worried about, that I don't know too much about it at the moment, and it's going to push me away from it, but it actually could be really good.
Well,
and that's where I'm.
So what you're going to do
about.
is go to those reading lists, go and see what documentary analysis is like, find out what people have talked, any research articles around policy, and it doesn't have to be educational policy, just see how they handle it. Because sadly, even your supervisor cannot make the decision for you, it is yours. And if it was easy, everyone would have an MA.
I think what you could do is ask people who know you and your colleagues, because they might spot what you might be interested. You see what I mean? More than you do with someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we all have something really unique to bring to anything that we do. We don't see it as being special, but it is. Well, that's it. So, what questions do people have?
I have a question, but I think we might be covering this later. It's about the literature review.
You can ask it now.
So,
literature review in what? In the research methods?
I think it's for both.
Yeah.
So I think I realized that sometimes researchers do literature review by paper. So they, in one paragraph, they talk about a specific paper. They say, "Oh, this is what they talk."
Yeah.
And then
that is not what we're looking for. That, I would say, is an annotated bibliography rather than a literature review. So a literature review is a review of the body of literature. So you read it, you keep records of your reading, because otherwise you'll be so cross with yourselves, however you want to organise it. And then my suggestion is you go by focus, okay, or idea or concept. So, and then it means that, people say that using balloons in snowy weather is really good. Then you could cite a couple of people that say that. However, if it's below a certain temperature,
I like the other one solely because it went into a little bit detail about the way that study was conducted. So it says that although they said this, there might be certain limitations to their findings. So it was like more insightful in that way.
So a literature review is about saying what the literature is. You would only indicate sort of how they did it if what you're drawing on is an outlier, or you're trying to make a rationale of why you don't think it's a good one to do. So it is more common in undergraduate where they will describe the literature, and that's not what you're doing. You are analysing the literature and then letting your reader know what the literature has found out. You would only really talk about how they did it if it was pertinent. It isn't sort of typical, and quite often with undergraduates they'll say, "Oh, this happened, so and so said this." However, it was a case study. There was only a small thing, so it's not generalizable, so it's not valid. And I'm thinking, well, why tell me? Why tell me about it if you've already rejected it because you don't think it's valid? It is valid. There's a misinterpretation around critique being about criticizing the methods. Okay, so kind of needs to read like a a story. Those citations, no, because if you go author to author, you are missing. You're not providing yourself with enough opportunities to clearly demonstrate synthesis, combining stuff, and analysis. And it's just a simple way. Because you're probably doing that in your head anyway. So if you write, starting with your focus or the concept or whatever, and then the authors. There are times when you do start with the author, but I think on the whole in the literature review, you know, it provides a more analytical approach.
Thank you.
A thing of beauty is a literature review, absolute thing of beauty. And you do really, so although you say, oh, well, I can't give my opinion, you kind of do, but yeah, so we're talking about, I wouldn't expect you to actually really say I in a literature review. So you might say, you know, I'm considering these areas in your introduction for your literature review, but you know, the literature review is the place where you're least likely to use the first person because you're analysing the literature for us. Methodology, absolutely you want to see the first person because it's your work. You know, the findings and you know, analysis, you may well, you know, you may say this is what happened, this is what the literature says, this is what I think, because that's the analysis. Can I ask, has anybody used the AI tools that are recommended by the library for helping them with this process? Which ones have you used?
Sci-Space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how's that worked for you?
I have not yet become very used to it, but I think it's a matter of using. Like the more you use it, the more comfortable you get with it, and the more you can rely on it. I feel like I put the paper there, I read the key points, but I still want to read the paper on my own.
Yeah, and actually that's what I would kind of want people to do. Did you say you'd used AI? How have you found it?
I think it's really helpful to have the bullet points of the paper.
Yeah.
And then it can have the important sentence and you can go back to the
paper.
Research paper.
Yeah.
So it's more quick.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the
Sci-Space.
Sci-Space. Now
It's like good because when you put the relevant sentences in it, it shows a lot of articles related to that sentence. So it is good as well.
What I would say is don't cite anything in your dissertation or any of your assignments that you haven't actually read. You know, you might not need to read all of it. Sorry, I didn't say that. But you really need to have read it, and you need to be aware that there are some AI papers out there that actually don't make sense.
No, this is very funny because sometimes I ask ChatGPT just to check it out. I'm like, okay, for this idea, can you show me the most relevant papers? And it would give you the perfect reference. And it would be like, oh, this is the paper that I need, but the paper wouldn't exist at all.
Yeah, so you do need to kind of, you know, and Google Scholar is beginning to pull those up as well, which is a bit concerning. So if you're using Google Scholar, if you have got libkey embedded, it will also pull up whether you can find it at Brooks. So I tend to focus on those ones because they are likely not to be AI'd. So
I like to run multiple books first.
Yeah, yeah.
Like you sign and it automatically gives you access to most of them, whereas on Google Scholar you have to like figure out how to sign in. Like
I usually just like copy and paste the title into the library search.
Just say, and if it moved out.
I must admit, every time I try and use AI for these sorts of things, I think, I haven't, I haven't yet found that it's as helpful as I'd like it to be. But yeah, I'm pleased that people are, are finding those useful because, there is a lot of reading to do. And when English isn't your first, well, even when English is your first language, if you struggle to do dense reading, it can be really helpful. My other top tip is looking for YouTube videos about things, to have somebody else explain it to you, because there's always a man who'll explain it to you.
So many aspects of life.
Indeed.
How to close your umbrella.
Yeah, you could have done with that. Yeah, and so if you're asked for a declaration about using AI, you can use it for planning and all of anything that any assignments that I have, but not for writing. And I will say the university is getting really good at picking it up. It was a bit hit and miss before. But at masters, to be honest, if you ask AI to write your assignment, it won't be good enough because it won't have the depth that you need.
I've had teachers at school when you haven't taught writing, approach to writing, so you always have to have a model text of different genres. And I've had teachers create those with AI, and I can tell.
Yeah,
it's got a tone.
Yeah, because you're an expert, and I think it's because when I've tried to use AI, it's been in my area of specialism, and I'm thinking, yeah, is that all you got?
But it saddens me that the first call to someone who's going to teach writing to children is to use an AI tool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not for that purpose. Yes, for other purposes, but not to create a text.
Right, I think we're done. Thank you very much. I hope that this has been helpful, and I'm really pleased that we've been able to kind of really talk about some of those niggly things, because sometimes we're not good at sharing those niggly things. But enjoy your dissertation. You just enjoy it. It will be horrible. Yeah, I won't be I'm not, it will just feel really horrible. It will feel like you're spreading your soul out for everybody to stamp on it, and you'll probably need to tie yourself down to a chair to get it done if it's anything like me. But it will be one of them. It's a privilege to be able to spend time thinking about things that you're really interested in. So finding ways that really help you kind of nail yourself to a chair. For me, it's doing my word count, because at least even if I don't think I've done much, it feels like I've made progress. And thinking is so important. Don't dismiss that as part of the process. But, as I say, and it will just there'll be times of pure joy, and there'll be times of when you think, I'll never get this done. But you will. You absolutely will.
Be staying in this room?
No, we've got to go back to the other one.
Okay.
Right, we're done and dusted.